Hey, we lit out here in the parking lot. Hey, this is Henry Carson III. Welcome to my podcast. As I told you guys, today is the first day. It's going to be the first day in a series of 4 debate events. And with me as my guest today, I have my brother in the Lord. I have my brother in the natural. And I have my brother, just a good brother with an open mind. I want to welcome to the show Mr. Tim Burks. He's our current N.W.O. Word title holder. And he has agreed to come on and put his belt up on the line. The way we're going to be doing this, it's going to be a series of 4 debates. We're going to let you guys judge who won that debate. We're going to be on different various hot topics, if you will. We're basically going to be debating it, and we're going to take the affirmative, we're going to take the negative, we're going to go back and forth, let you guys judge. At the end of that, we'll be our world title holder of that Word N.W.O. belt that we'll have on next week. So what I'm saying is I'm issuing it out to anybody, everybody, somebody who wants to be somebody on Henry Carson III, my podcast. If you want to come on and be a debater and you want to go on there and basically challenge one of us for the championship title, whomever will come out holding it, you're welcome to do so. With that being said, just hit me up at the bottom in the comments. Let me know I want to be part of this, and we'll bring you on and see what you really got. Well, without further ado, today's debate will basically be definitely on our first title of discussion was going to be to statue or not to statue. And I think right now that's definitely a hot topic for you, those of you who may have been with your head in the sand over the past 3 months. There's a debate going around that removing all statues of history, that's a great thing to do. There's some that stand on the other side of it that they may not agree with it. At this point, I'm not going to tell you which side I'm taking, but you're going to see I'll either be affirmative or the negative on it. First off, as my guest on the show, welcoming my brother, I'm going to let him basically start off with the first bit of that. Then I'm going to come back and you guys decide who's the affirmative or who is the negative in this argument. The topic is to statue or not to statue. Here we go. Mr. Burks, how would you feel about the current issue in the world with the removing of statues?
Well, with the current issue, I think it's best suited to go to the root of when these things started. So what research will dictate is there are 2 booms of these statues in U.S. history where a plethora of them are being put up. Now, the group responsible for putting these up in local places, your courthouses, your things like that, this is a group known as the United Daughters of the Confederacy. Now, this group forms around 1894, and essentially what they're doing, they're taking military defeat of the Confederacy, being Southern socialites, and what they're doing is they're impacting people culturally and socially. So, from 1900 to 1911, we see a very big boom of these statues being put nationwide. And that's where the term heritage over hate starts to come from. Now, specifically, a corresponding fact, between the year 1900 and 1911, these are only confirmed and public. 549 African Americans are publicly lynched between 1900 and 1911. Now, the other boom where we start to see these statues, specifically of Confederate soldiers being put up, is during the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s. Now, when we correspond, we see Martin Luther King is assassinated in 1968 in Nashville, Tennessee. Coincidentally, about 2 years later, about approximately 4 miles up the road, is a gold or bronze bust of a former slave owner, Confederate general, and coincidentally, the founder of the Ku Klux Klan. So, from my perspective, it seems as if the plight of these specific statues of the Confederacy being put up are done almost mockingly, as in insult to injury in regards to African Americans. That is with the research that I've done, with the information that I've had at hand and what I've read to, these statues are symbolic And the quote that I'll use today is, statues pay homage, books tell history. And I'm going to take that approach because I don't feel that. And we're just talking about Confederacy right now. We're not talking about how much injustices were and are still being done under the United States flag or any of that stuff. We're just talking specifically about the Confederacy of the Civil War. Personally, I think in the current climate, in the reasoning that these statues were monumented in the first place, I personally think they should be removed.
Okay, so you've heard his view, definitely. Thank you for that. I guess I will make a parenthetical insertion. I can do that because this is my show, of course. Ultimately, I guess my brother here, so he would be taking the affirmative for the removal of it. Ultimately, I will say before I go on, as you know, I'll be taking the negative of it, obviously. But as a Christian, as a believer in the Lord, ultimately, I don't believe that any statue or image should be upheld of anyone, be it in history or a person, etc., because the Lord said we should not create a graven image to pay homage to or to worship beyond Him. Now, with that said, I know we're not arguing Scripture or the Bible today. So for the fact of the just raw debate of it, I will be taking the negative. The reason being in that is because, as I look, as my brother so eloquently put it, when we began to look at the history, and he mentioned it himself, he was talking about the difference in written history versus a monument almost set up in a mocking way. I guess my thing would be on that. I'm not against the removal of statues or even casting them in the sea, but my biggest problem would be that there's a lot of symbolic changing and not enough substantive changing. My viewpoint would be, before we tear down the statue, we need to begin to make amendments and change within government, congressional, and the changing of amendments. We go back to 1863 when we were emancipated, so to speak. Quick history, if you look up the definition of emancipate, that means that we were not freed, we were only liberated. I say we were only liberated like that of a dog. That means that I have a chain and I can only go but so far before they yank that chain. So I will say this, that when I'm speaking of the statue per se, my issue is that there's too much more substantive change that needs to be done before we begin to remove history. What I found in my experience is that when you go back to the Reconstruction period, that begins to show us with the burning of books, with the removing of statues, with the removal of monuments, anytime that we began to remove bits of our history, be it whether I agree or I don't agree, whether it's uncomfortable or whether it's acceptable, we lose a portion of who we are. One of the benchmarks for my argument for maintaining the statues would be that we are still the United States of America. So we are a nation of immigrants. We are a nation of melting pots, people that came from all over the planet. So there's history for everybody right here in this continent, or in this country, if you will say. My main concern is that while there could be a lot of substantive change going on to where there's amendments being changed, there's real reform being made, it seems as if all of the tension has been taken away and placated almost to concentrate on the removal of a statue or the removal of things that I don't agree with. When we begin to talk on white supremacy, the fact is this, and I would ask my brother this question. The fact is that if a statue in the United States of America is white supremacy, then me working a job where the CEO is probably a white man, that's white supremacy. Me going to a school or a learning institution is white supremacy. I guess my question would be, do we burn down our jobs? Do we burn down the schools? Do we stop supporting even sports leagues because this is all white supremacy? My thing is that the things that I think a lot of times with removing of things, we don't deal with the greater of it. I think for me to see a statue of the fact of what happened in our history, it begins to show how the Lord blessed me to be stronger to still overcome even in the midst of that. I take a schoolyard bully analogy, for example. The bully's still there. No matter whether the bully's removed from the actual schoolyard or the bully's on the outside of the schoolyard, it's still a bully that you're going to have to deal with. I can remove every statue from coast to coast, but the supremacy, the mindset, is what we still have to deal with. That has to be dealt with in the halls of justice in the corridors of Congress in the changing of amendments. The way I look at it is that the more of that statue that I see, I'm more of an advocate for, let's go into the dirty history of that monument that we're looking at. When we go into that dirty history, that also lets us begin to show that, yes, there's some history to be celebrated in that statue, but there's also a conversation about truly freeing a people group that you've otherwise oppressed within your borders as well. So I guess at the end of the day, I'm almost not, I guess, I wouldn't be against removing of the statue, but I would say we must remove the statue after we've began to make substantive change in the halls of Congress with changing of amendments and getting stuff right. Because as I've always said, in order to make America, what we say, make America great, we must first make America right. What would you say to that, my brother?
I mean, definitely some good points as far as that's concerned, and I agree as far as the whole supremacy is concerned regarding anybody, Black, Asian, any specific group. I think in regards specifically to these statues,
Okay.
when we go a bit further and we go past the statue's kind of the giant in the background.
Mm-hmm.
The group that I'm referring to specifically in the United Daughters of the Confederacy.
Yes, sir.
What this specific group achieves is they're able now, and once again, these are rich white ladies from the South who are in a position to do these things because of their monetary gain and their social status. They're socialites. They're operating in a plutocracy.
Okay.
So what's happening in the early 1900s in the South specifically, this group is orchestrating a coup, if you will. And what they're doing is they're inserting specific information in textbooks, in history books, in the South, Georgia, basically any former Confederate state where they did secede. This information is being spewed, if you will. And essentially what the information is, now this specific group is very pro-KKK. They're very supremacist. So essentially, they're changing the narrative. They're saying that the slaves were happy to be slaves. What'd you go and ruin it for? And we're talking about bloodlines of people who made millions of dollars,
Right.
even in the 1860s.
Okay.
Slave owning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happens is
So you're talking about the psychological effect of
it's
what
deep,
they're doing.
It's deeper than the
deep-rooted.
statue. Like
I got you.
like we're not on this topic, but just a brief linchpin to the Confederate flag, for example. Whether you're with or against it is irrelevant. It's basically unseen from 1865 until 1948 in this country. What happens is there is a group called the Dixiecrats.
Okay.
Their symbol is a donkey, like the Democratic Party,
An ass.
with the
Right.
with the stars and bars Confederate flag.
I'm with you.
And basically what happens is all these children that grew up reading all of these lean facts about the Civil War,
Right.
coming from these influences. In the 50s, once this flag is brought back, these are the people that become your segregationists.
Okay.
These are the people...
So just so we could get it straight right now. So I guess at this point, my question would simply be, so the Dixiecrats weren't a good bunch of people.
No,
right?
the Dixiecrats are for black people in
So
in
the
shackles.
Dixiecrats were for black people in shackles.
Absolutely.
Okay, you can continue.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And a lot of them are saying heritage, not hate. And this is not isolated. A lot of times people will microcosm it down to, the governor of Mississippi in the 60s, segregation and things like that. It goes further than that. As Henry mentioned earlier, during the Reconstruction period, after the so-called emancipation, you've got, at one time in the early 1900s, almost 150,000 registered voters of African American descent in Louisiana.
Right.
Once the KKK takes effect and things of that nature, within about 2 years, that number dwindles to 5,000.
So I guess my question would be at this point, because I'm going with what you're saying. Would you agree at this point? Would it be more in this juncture that we're in, this window of opportunity? Will we have more of an opportunity to make substantive change while the statues are still erected? Or do you feel that once they're thrown into the sea, we would almost have no longer an argument to make?
I think
because I feel as if it keeps attention to keep the statues up for a moment.